They were not drafted, they volunteered. On Jerusalem, the system capital, Prince Caligastia stood before a multitude of willing candidates and chose only 100, ascendant mortals, each from a different inhabited world, 50 male and 50 female, drawn from hundreds of thousands. Their thought adjusters were detached for the strange requirements of this mission, but their souls were seasoned, their minds trained through the progressive worlds, ready for a frontier assignment no one could truly picture until it began. Caligastia himself was no novice, a Lananondek son with long system experience and an ambition sharpened by time. At last he received what he had asked for, a planetary princehood on Urantia, nearly 500,000 years before our day, arriving when human will was first dawning beside the emergence of the races. With him came Dalagastia, his deputy, and the 100 who would become his corporeal staff. Urantia did not see them arrive.
The 100 came held in seraphic custody, suspended in unconscious stillness while preparations were made for something unprecedented on this world, their re-embodiment in material form. For this, native human stock was selected, 100 andinite donors, 50 male and 50 female, whose life plasm would be transferred under meticulous supervision into bodies prepared for the staff. 10 days. That was the span from arrival to full waking, from held to walking. And when they rose, newly repersonalized, they stood as human-like beings, andinite in characteristics and language, yet superhuman in origin and capacity. The nearby tribes who had never seen such ideal humans carried the shock into legend, but the staff did not amplify the myth. They refused spectacle. They worked as much as possible by natural means, teaching, modeling, persuading, so that progress would be real and not merely fear.
They lived as flesh. They ate, drank, slept, and labored as material beings. Yet their physical continuity depended on higher life provisions that Urantia did not possess. A city rose near the head of the Persian Gulf, Dalamatia. Not a metropolis by modern measures, but a planned garden city in a savage world. Walled, ordered, experimental. Council mansions arranged around a sensual spiritual focal point, an architecture of purpose rather than vanity. Inside the walls, workshops, instruction circles, cultivated plots. Outside, tribal encampments, visitors drawn to a place rumored to be different, safe, bright, governed. In the heart of it all was a quiet center, worship taught without idols, learning offered without conquest. The staff lived like teachers among students. They avoided miracles, they feared deification more than hardship. Their power was never meant to be theater, it was meant to be leaven. They divided themselves into 10 councils, 10 members each, domains of culture, each with a leader whose name became known among mortals. When issues overlapped, councils met under Dalagastia's coordinating chairmanship. And then the slow revolution began. So slow it barely looked like revolution at all. They taught food security and welfare, wells, springs, irrigation, preservation, and the patient logic of seasons. They shaped domestication. Cattle improved for milk and meat, oxen trained for pulling, long experiments that nudged survival toward stability. They dealt with predators and safety, secure dwellings, stockades, early walls, how fear of the night begins to loosen its grip. They guarded knowledge, organized instruction and the first steps toward writing, so memory could outlive a single voice. The city became a living classroom, a visible proof that order could exist without tyranny, that advancement could arrive without slaughter. Centuries passed, then millennia. The world remained hard, but around Dalamatia, the human story bent upward. At dusk, Torches climbed the walls. Dalamatia looked secure. The gardens still breathed, the workshops still glowed, but the air began to carry a tension no one could fully name, like a pressure change before a storm. Within the city, Caligastia withdrew into himself. The slow pace of evolution irritated him. The limitations of the human mind felt like chains. The long discipline of uplift began to feel inside him like an insult. And somewhere beyond Urantia, a greater rebellion gathered its words into a manifesto. One midwinter day, ordinary at first, Caligastia summoned all 10 councils to an extraordinary assembly. He stood before the 100 and proclaimed a new reality, that he was absolute sovereign of Urantia, and that allegiance must transfer to him and to the new liberty he offered. Caligastia demanded the governing powers be handed over immediately.
The room froze. Then Van rose, not in drama, in refusal. Van denounced it as rebellion and urged restraint, an appeal upward, a pause, a chance for truth to answer. The staff hesitated. They agreed to wait for guidance from Lucifer, the system sovereign, still unaware that Lucifer was the source of the poison. And when the reply came, it did not correct Caligastia. It confirmed him. Lucifer demanded obedience to the self-proclaimed god of Urantia. The thin veil tore. The universe line was drawn. Van answered with a legendary 7-hour indictment, charging Caligastia, Dalagastia, and Lucifer with betrayal, declaring loyalty to the universe sovereign and appealing to the Most Highs for lawful intervention. Then came the immediate consequence. Urantia's communication circuits were severed. Planetary quarantine. No council in or out. Every being on Urantia, angel, midwayer, and staff alike, was forced to decide in isolation. Dalagastia formally declared Caligastia god of Urantia and demanded the choice: follow rebellion or stand loyal to the unseen sovereign. There was no mortal battlefield. There was a battle of mind and spirit, 7 bitter years of persuasion, fear, logic, seduction, and courage. The staff fractured. Angels and midwayers fractured. Even the human pupils around Dalamatia split, some intoxicated by the promise of godlike autonomy, others sickened by the lie. And beside Van stood an Andonite man, Amadon. Not brilliant by celestial standards, not armored by advanced education, yet unshakable, standing with Van through the entire long crisis, becoming the human emblem of loyalty when higher minds fell. At last, the issues clarified. Decisions hardened into destiny. Only then did external intervention arrive, emergency Melchizedek receivers, provisional authority to replace the defaulted prince, but the damage had already entered the bones of the world. When receivership was established, the loyal staff, all except Van, were returned to Jerusalem, reunited with their waiting adjusters, free to resume the interrupted ascent. Van chose to remain. He petitioned to stay on Urantia until the coming of Adam and Eve, and the request was granted. Most of the loyal human attendants were translated as well, but Amadon stayed, by choice, alongside Van. By a mercy measure linked to the Tree of Life, now removed from the doomed region and transplanted to Van's highland refuge, Van and Amadon were sustained for more than 150,000 years, living as a continuity line through the long, dark aftermath. In exile, Van reorganized what remained, 10 committees mirroring the old council structure, a reduced but determined scaffolding of order meant to keep truth alive in a world suddenly without its intended governance. The rebels could not keep what they stole. Cut off from higher life supports, they faced mortality. They began to build a legacy the only way stranded supermen can, by mixing into humanity and producing the strains that would become known as nodites, carrying fragments of Dalamatian knowledge into the tribes while also seeding myths of gods mating with mortals. Dalamatia itself did not endure. A little more than a century and a half after the rebellion, seismic upheavals and the sea engulfed the region. The first world capital sank beneath the waters of the Persian Gulf. The city had already degenerated, its spiritual center profaned into a shrine of a false god, and then it was gone, never to re-emerge. The rebels and their families became wanderers, settling north and east, leaving behind the land of Nod in later memory, an echo of exile turned into geography, lineage turned into legend. If you ask what survived, the answer is not a city. What survived was a thread, ideas planted too early for the world to hold, that knowledge should be preserved, that cooperation should replace endless vendetta, that hygiene matters, that trade can be peaceful, that worship can aim upward instead of outward, and above all, a thread of loyalty, held by Van and by Amadon when the world went quiet and heaven's circuits went dark. The first planetary staff came to uplift a primitive world. Their story became, instead, Urantia's first great test of allegiance, proof that civilization can be taught and that truth can be carried, even when leadership collapses. The torch did not go out, it simply moved into the mountains and waited.